All right, guys, welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy. And if you are new to the show, we have several different segments where we have rants where I go on little rants of things that I've seen either on social media or, other topics that are hot. Currently, we got full-length interviews, which is one that we have today. We have mental minutes for just mental game hacks here and there and deep dive educational videos. But if you have any questions or topics or future guests you want to have on, email that in to inthezonepodcast123@gmail.com. And if you're new to this, basically, I don't run ads on the show. I don't let anyone, basically tell me what to say or not to say. And, we're just here to spread and make the game of baseball better. So if you find value in this, you learn something, you like it, you don't like it, sure, share the show. Let people know. If you don't share the show, that also tells me, hey, I need to do better. So, but yeah, without further ado, our full-length interview for today is Lantz Wheeler, the core velocity belt. What's going on, Lance?
Hey, what's up, Garrison? Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Well, I know we were conversing a little bit through Twitter, and obviously that's where a lot of people do connect in the baseball world these days is, just conversing on there, having constructive conversations and some not so constructive,
Right.
So, and I'm sure people have seen, both sides of that. But here lately, you've been kind of talking a little bit about, feel has always been something that you've always had, even from the start of since I followed you, and having the core velocity belt, starting out with the pelvis versus having a bunch of other, modalities and stuff. But kind of curious to kind of hear a little bit more of the history on that and how that kind of came about.
On what, just as far as the concept of feel?
Yeah, just the feel, where you were kind of talking a little bit about, just proprioception and going with that, and then kind of how the core velocity belt. Yeah,
man, it was all most of what I'll always go back to was Paul Nyman, who was the guy that really forced me to really rethink and actually got me in the habit of, starting to question a lot of stuff. And then Dr. Seals, director of neurosurgery at Vanderbilt, he's the football chief medical officer now. He's another big influence. But really, I think the first thing is that when we start to talk about feel is that most think of it as a physical sensation, right? As if it's the same for everybody. Hey, I touched the stove, it's hot. And I know what hot feels like. So we're pretty much on the same page. They sometimes overlook or sometimes refer to it as the perception, feel versus real. What's your perception of it? But, you also got to think about it being a feeling. It's an emotion. It's just overall awareness or intuition. So there's many faces of feel. So the one I'll compare would be sensation versus perception. So when we came out here, I took Rex, my little boy, fishing. And so he'd always fished in a pond back in Tennessee, right? You throw the worm on it, just drop it, you tight line it, it jerks, you got to bite. So right away that there's fish on there. So as we go to the ocean, we're on the pier, we see this old dude, and he's just killing fish after fish after fish. So Rex goes, jerks it up, there's nothing on the line, jerks it up, there's nothing on the line. So the problem was they were both had the same sensory information available to him, but because of his depth, the older man's depth of experience, his history, his learned associations, his perception or feel was much clearer because he could process that sensory feedback and download it much faster than Rex was able to. So it wasn't until Rex actually caught a fish that he could start to differentiate, that he'd given his brain enough information that it could differentiate between a fish and a current. So that's how he started to do it. So the physical feel would be both men feel the tightness on the line, but it's the perception of feel that allows them to process and make a decision in real time faster than the other that makes one more efficient than the other.
Yeah. Wow.
With the body weight.
I love that analogy, actually, because that's almost really parallel to what's happening in the baseball world, where it's hey, you have this perception of being in game and making adjustments there. and then also having that in, a little vacuum inside these little training facilities.
Right. Little vacuum. Exactly. Yeah.
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 So no, I mean that makes total sense because unless they're doing like something a little bit similar to the game, like live ABs, like yeah, they might have a little bit, but then there's still runners in play and
Yeah.
weather conditions and other factors that I talk about a lot when I go down like the ecological dynamics rabbit hole to like zoom out and see the whole picture.
That's exactly right, man. Because it's the context of the room that's going to shape the content within. And as our coach, man, that's our job. Is something we have 100% control over. Would be, well, I guess it would be partly our. I don't know if you could say communication because that's a two-way street. But as far as shaping the room and creating that bubble or that ecological system, man, that's where it's at. So if I want guys to stay shorter, I'm just going to lower the height of the room. Like it's really not. But no, here's the thing with baseball, man. Everybody's focused on the outputs. Because the outputs are measured, that's where our lens is. That's where we look. Nobody's looking at the inputs. Nobody's looking at the actions causing the reactions. Nobody's looking at the movements. They're all looking at the consequences. And because we put that in such a one-dimensional frame with how ASMI bucketed those, we're looking at everything on a sagittal plane as if everybody's throwing from the same plane of rotation. Everybody's arriving at foot plant the exact same way, the most efficient way possible. And it's not until they land that everything goes wrong. Because that's what you see is like, I could never understand how if I land, if every movement has a consequence, if every action has a reaction, how could anything at landing ever be the real problem unless it was being intentionally done?
Yeah. No,
I just don't see. I mean, I've asked myself that over and over and over. And so I start to look at the drills and stuff I was doing in like 16, 17. And after I talked with SEALs, that's when it really started to change for me that I was like, holy crap, man. I mean, even as progressive as I might have, I look back and I feel like writing an apology letter to so many of my kids because that's another cool thing too, is just always trying to learn something where you're like, how did I do my job yesterday without knowing that? Right. But yeah, I just started to look at it and I started to think, man, we're just looking at this whole entire landscape backwards. So we took our shift to everything starting prior to the foot landing because another way to look at it, because I think a big part of this is a communication. Like baseball it doesn't have its own nomenclature. We've got all this science, we've got all these advanced degrees, we've got this billions of dollars worth of equipment. But you go to Venice Beach, man, you got homeless kids that just skateboard all day long. They're looking for their meal. You say, hey, dude, show me a kickflip. Not only will they know what it is, but they could demonstrate it probably. And it's just their culture is so much different. But you get into baseball and there's nobody, you can say stay back and everybody's going to interpret it totally different.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big problem too, man. But I think a lot of this was nowadays, it's like in baseball. If I come into a room and I speak over your head, I confuse the shit out of you. Well, I've just created a platform. You need my services because you're thinking, man, I didn't understand a damn word he said. He's a lot smarter than I am. So that's kind of how it is. And so the more I can regurgitate anatomical and physiological textbooks, it starts to put books underneath that platform. So I suddenly start to feel just a little bit taller. And I really think that's what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and I had a conversation with a coach the other day where, content and like trying to go in depth with a lot of that stuff is totally different than actually coaching a guy.
Yes.
If they're looking and like watching a video and they want to go in depth on it, like that's totally cool. But for you to be able to relate with an athlete, you don't need to go in depth with all that stuff unless they already have some of that knowledge anyways. But I find that like the 0.001% of athletes that even have the knowledge to conceptualize most of that stuff.
There's no doubt. And shit, I've always said, if you need an Excel sheet and extension cord to coach, you're in the wrong sport.
Yeah. No, you're not wrong.
Yeah, because we're coaching this. We're coaching the spreadsheet. We're coaching the Excel chart versus the athlete. But most never consider that because we're so focused on what we never even ask about who. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm working with a kid right now. He's in front of me. How the hell does a study from 2014 where 18 Korean kids had 42-degree leg extension help this guy in front of me? I don't know.
Yeah. There's no practical application. I mean, I'll kind of talk about the elephant in the room here as far as that too, because it's like, hey, like, you have places like Driveline or ASMI or like some of these other ones that are like, hey, we're putting out all these research studies and stuff, which I'll give them credit. It's definitely better than what it was before, where they were like doing this against 78-mile-an-hour throwers or 80-mile-an-hour throwers. So like the velocity threshold, I guess, has maybe increased some, but you know, the practical application definitely isn't there.
Uh-uh.
For that, which I know you definitely point to a lot in a lot of your tweets, because you know there's a lot of things where it's just like, hey, let's just throw this one blanket of drills or one thing, and it's just going to solve everything, which is never, you know, I've been having coached nearly as much as you have. I've been in this for probably about maybe 5 years, but I've never attacked the guy the same. And I've talked about this in previous podcasts where like even writing programs and strength side of things, I have to treat every kid like a blank canvas and learn how to, you know, go from there and be like, hey, all right, like you're struggling with this, but this is actually the reason why, is what you talk
Yeah.
about to a lot, is like, hey, it's actually from your first move, or it's actually from, you know, how your setup is. And, you know, all of that, it matters.
Yeah, it matters, but you know what the problem is? It can't be measured, so it's never the focus with most facilities, I
Yeah,
guess, most of baseball.
for sure.
Because what most of them are looking at, they're focused on what can be measured. So that, and it's what can't be measured. Let's face it, that's what matters most. It's thoughts, it's intentions, it's my perception of the movement, it's my purpose behind. That's the driver. That's the why. And then from there, it's just the what. But so many guys are, it's like we've got this creek and there's this waterfall and we've got all this trash. There's this trailer park just throwing keg parties. They're throwing shit up top, man. All these beer cans are floating the bottom. And we're not even looking up top. We're sitting here trying to come up with all these solutions to get the
Yeah.
can out of the
Yeah.
water rather than realizing what's really polluting it. But why does it? Because, well, number one, they're not looking at stuff. They're not considering thoughts because they're seeing all this research. They're seeing all this data. They're bucketing all this stuff. So those buckets are just telling them where to focus their attention. And wherever their attention is, it's letting the brain say, hey, this is what's really important. So they're
Mhm.
missing the rest of it because they've stripped it. But I think a big part of that too, man, is just the American society where our science is really focused on isolation. It's on reduction versus like the Far East, who's going to take the greater picture. We want to try to narrow it down to isolate it as if the body, like the body parts, the arm action, all this stuff works independently of the middle. And there's just no cause and effect consideration for any of that when I start to see evaluation. And then
Yeah.
training the same way. Like I see a lot of guys are just isolating arms, and I say that not like I'm knowing it all, just because I've tried all this crap, and a lot of the stuff that I'm sharing, I'm talking about, I tried like that pitching mechanics mastermind system. Holy crap! I should have been charged for larceny every time somebody bought this shit. But it was it just looking back at that, but it was still a lot of it were the same principles, but there's just so much that it's tough. I always think about this when we're thinking about the proximal to distal. Like I can't be worried about the splash and trying to put towels on the side of the pool if I'm not changing the guy that's jumping in, giving the belly flop and causing it, right? Like we're focused on all this stuff after the splash versus what's really causing the splash. Because if I can target that cause, usually it's a very teeny tiny movement flaw that starts upstream and spawns as mechanics downstream. And man, that's why I've started to see that if you can find the cause and you can target that cause and shape the room, man, like you force change in minutes. It doesn't take months. So I think a lot of times when we're saying like muscle memory and here's a 6-week program to change the pattern, I think the
Yeah.
real problem is we haven't identified the cause.
Mhm. Well, and I agree with a lot of your tweets too. It's like, hey, you don't need to have 6 weeks. Like,
Uh-uh.
yeah, some things do take some physiological adaptation, maybe, but if they're already advanced and skilled and they're not a complete novice in the skill of throwing, yeah, you can see those things happen pretty instantaneously, no doubt.
Mhm. You know, the biggest boost is always going to be your proprioception. That
Hmm.
that boosts the entire system, man. Like once a guy can have more awareness. It's almost like as if the keys on your keyboard have been polished and now they're clearly labeled because so many are typing and trying because movement will tell a story. So as they start to type this message, they're missing and keys are being fired and stuck. And just proprioception, man, is a big part of that. I think the awareness aspect of it. And it's the simple things.
Yeah, or it's the perception action,
For
you know,
sure.
something that you're going for. I think too, just to kind of rewind back on this a little bit, whenever you're putting out a lot of tweets on saying like, hey, show me the data. And I think a lot of people interpret the data as like the stuff that you're going to see on an Excel spreadsheet or
Yeah.
the stuff that you're going to see here. And, or, the results or like what was the change from like X mile an hour to this, which, you know, maybe part of it, but a lot of people also miss the point of like, hey, the other information that you're seeing with your eyes and that you're picking up and that a good quality coach picks up, that's also data too.
Yeah, everything's data, and that's you've nailed it, Garrison. Like, what I see, what I hear, what I feel, it's all data. But again, we've taken this lens of science and we've focused it somewhere else, right? Because data is always available if you know where to look for it, and
Yeah.
most don't. We're relying on a coach because a coach is telling me this is data. They're telling me what this is, but and so they're never taught to collect or gather. And really, when we talk about guys that can fine tune and make adjustments, those guys are always present. Because they're present, their attention is what's happening in front of them. It's just like they've shut down all those multiple browser tabs, man. Now their system can really process and download the information faster than the opponent in the box. And that's why you're going to see some of that. But you had another thought too, and heck, I forgot where I was going with that. Maybe it'll hit me in a second. But yeah, you touched on some good points there, man.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, no, the data stuff. It's funny how this works. And I was telling my buddy about this the other day. Like for years we were just doing whatever we were doing. There was no data or whatever measuring the stuff. And then all of a sudden it comes, you got any data to back that up? That's all I heard during COVID for a year and a half. Got any data? We got all this data. So, all right, so let's start to look at this. Let's put this under a little bit finer microscope, right? So I came to the conclusion all that data was bullshit. There was no data behind any of this stuff. So now it's funny because the same people that were asking for data, now when I said, all right, show me some data behind that, man, they get sensitive as hell over it now. So
yeah. Well, part of it is too, they're like, it's almost, they take it too personally. And so they feel like it's an attack on them. And then they like, regurgitate on you. But if they take the ego out of it, they'll be like, oh, you know what? Actually, this probably is not the entire picture. Or like, yeah, I'm collecting a lot of this stuff, but I'm not seeing a lot of this. And one study that, I think you might have commented on it where they were saying like, hey, there's no like repeatable mechanics because there was different ways on how these athletes were performing all of their just the sequence of the throw. So like pelvis, torso, shoulders, arm, hand, it was all different for every single throw. So it's like, okay, knowing that, what's the point of going to a biomechanics lab, putting a bunch of markers on, which I've done back in college. I did a little mini study and I had a ground reaction force plate and all that. But as I was doing it, I was kind of like questioning the validity of it. I'm like, yeah, we're learning all this stuff. We're like, hey, like, is everything in the same spot? And I'm like, from pitch 1 to pitch 10, I've had markers that were flying off of the wrist and I had to put stuff on there, but it's not in the exact same spot. So like, yeah, there's the margin of error there is like, it's huge. And not even to mention like you do that on a completely different day, and you go back to the question, or I guess it's more of a quote where they're like, hey, no man stands in the same river twice because it's not the same river and it's not the same man. So it's like, all right, so how can you validate all of these data points unless you're taking a large amount of it and taking the trend over time, like where some of these pro guys, they have it in real game situations and they have the Qualysis, or I forget the exact cameras, but they're picking up like just points of like where they're at versus like the actual little sensors. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not, but if you're able to track that over the course of an entire season versus just one little bullpen that you go throw somewhere, I think that's more valuable than that.
I don't even think it matters. Honestly, I don't see how it matters because you can't tell me that the first pitch of the game is going to be the same as the ninth inning when you've got a no hitter and it's the ALCS playoff championship game against a guy that's took you deep 3 times. Like that's 2 totally different. Like it don't matter. I think the problem is, and it's something I went forever was just focus on positions, man. It was positions because again, it's where my lens was.
I was there too. Yeah.
Yeah, man. But you got to think if we're going to talk about a sequencing problem and it's a timing issue, well, what's required of sequencing? Coordination, right? So if I'm going to coordinate the parts, the location of the parts, and then sequence those in time, I've got to have coordination. To have coordination, I have to have proprioception. To have rotation, I have to have stability. So instead of looking at the byproducts in the third layer, if we would just address those foundational movements and issues, I think then the body, just let the body unwind how it wound up, right? But again, I spent so many daggone years chasing this and saying, hey, because the arm was doing this, he's going to do this, or because his stride was 120, and I had guys jumping out there and they'd lose velocity. But that's what it was, man. I was just focused on the content, and to me, it's a science of one. If science proves it works for this guy, that's the only thing I need.
Yeah, n equals one. Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely felt guilty to that. Early in my career, I was waking up at 5 a.m. doing towel drills, thinking the further I strided, and if I hit that glove in front of me or the chair in front of me, that I was doing good. You know?
Right. Let me show you. There's a video. I'll send this to you right
Yeah.
after we stop this. This was one that this is a perfect example of how we can misconstrue science or use science to create an illusion of it being something else. And that was it was these guys. They had this motion capture, they had the skeletons, they had it all. And so they were showing how detrimental a towel drill was versus a plyo ball.
Hmm.
So they showed that, and they showed all the degrees and extension, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, you got to be kidding me. So your purpose with the towel was to reach straight out as far as you could reach. Your purpose with the plyo ball is to throw as hard as you can. So one is rotating while one's jumping out. That's their purpose. Form
It's
follows
comparing apples and
function.
oranges, though. Yeah.
Yeah, form follows function. Function follows purpose. You want to change the function instantly, change purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were comparing that, and they were using that as if it were science and had all these retweets and likes. And I'm like, holy shit, you're missing the whole point about all this, man.
Hmm.
But again, it comes back to, it's like if I have this Mac in front of me, man, I've got this brain, and how we can look at this. There's so many capabilities and possibilities, but we just don't know the command shortcuts. We're stuck on Control Alt Delete, and we don't know the rest of it. So we don't even know those are accessible or available. We don't know those are possibilities. So we never really step outside that scope or that boundary.
Yeah. Or Control Alt Delete or copy and paste.
Right. Yeah. And copy and paste. That's another thing.
Yeah.
That shit drives me crazy. Like, coming from college baseball world, like, you just gave credit where credit was. Like, there was no ego. And it's not that it's so much of an ego. The thing about it is that we can take a concept in baseball. Let's say, bless Pythagorean theorem's heart. Like, if it had ever been a pitching concept, it would have had 17 different names.
Oh, yeah.
But that's the thing. It's that beg, steal, borrow mentality in baseball. And this really interrupts the language. It really starts to distort and dilute a lot of it. Is that, especially with the birth of social media, man, you will say something that, like, might make sense, or in maybe it's a new concept. Let's just say it's like ride the slide. It's not drop and drive, it's not top. Let's just give the visual of ride the slide and just getting your hips on plane. Well, the next thing you know, it'll be the same concept, but you'll have 20 different names by it, because it's almost as if the instructor wants to put just his little piece of thing on it, so they want to change it. But if that had been math and it was the same concepts taught, and everybody went along the same lines, we all had this nomenclature. A kick flip was a kick flip. It wasn't a Jersey red flip or whatever the guy's name was, right?
Yeah.
It was just a kick flip. All right, you got it. Call it a kick flip. Let's go. What's next? So now we're all on the same page with stuff. But when we start to dilute and we start to run into some of those subtleties like that, over time, it's just like a compounding effect. It just creates a little bit more of a divide.
Yeah. Well, since from, I guess, early in my career to how I've seen things evolve to now, a really blatant one, and if they're listening to this, more than happy to have a conversation with them. But I think the biggest one was when Ron Wilforth had his drill set, and then Kyle Bodie basically renamed everything, but then just, used the similar types of drills, or like Marshall drills turned to pivot picks. That's probably the biggest one I could think of.
And you need to check the old mastermind system, because that most of what they're using is still straight off that.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Offside disconnection and all the other stuff. Luckily I found out the shit didn't work, so I don't use it. They can have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's just kind of what guys do, man. They'll take your paper and they'll put their name at the top of it.
It's crazy.
Woolforth was as bad as anybody. He was one who kickstarted probably most of that.
Unfortunately, I've kind of seen that firsthand.
Mm-hmm. Well, his guys doing all the marketing, that's what they would push.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when I was digging into research, man, I was looking at the why behind everything, and it's just funny what you'll find sometimes.
Definitely is. Definitely is. Well, I'll also I guess we can shift the subject a little bit here.
Before you go any further,
Yeah, yeah.
you
Let's do
talking
it.
about like when people start to get emotional over the data. Like
Yeah.
here's how I would see that. Like if you're literally think about that, if you're emotionally attached to your data, there's a good example of feel versus real.
Yeah.
It's about as clear as you can make it, right? But why would you ever get attached to data unless you're just validating your beliefs?
Mm, yeah. I mean, if anyone like is an actual coach and what's right for the athletes and for the game of baseball in general, really, like if they find out that they're wrong, they'll be like, all right, cool. Sorry.
That's what we should be trying to do. Like
Yeah.
data is a place to ask better questions. It's not how we use it as the answer. That's not the case. Like
Hmm.
we just want science to figure out how we can fine tune this process and nail it down to ask a better question to make it even better the next versus saying, this is it, this is mine, this is it, this is how we do it. Don't question it.
Yeah. Everybody wants to have their little spin on it.
Yeah,
But
but we get emotionally attached.
I love what you said at the beginning before we even started this recording was everyone needs to learn how to ask better questions or question everything, really. And I've said that several times too. It's like, hey, like, is this actually the best way to do this, or does everyone need to do a reverse throw before
Right.
they do anything? Like, probably not.
Right. Here's something my brother, he was a JUCO guy. Um, I made this tweet today, but he's the plant manager at Ford, one of their larger plants. So he's probably, I guess, top 10 in their company. And you're talking about straight up model for if you looked up junior college idiot, here's this guy. But
Love
he
it.
brought up a point, man, is that I was like, how'd you do this? I was like, I know, like when you get into the robotics, man, tell me what you did. He goes, dude, when one of those engineers would come in, I would just, and they would say something I had no idea what they're talking about. I would say, interesting. Why do you say that? And
Yeah.
so the guy would look at him like either he knew that I knew something he didn't, or that was a good question to ask. So he said they'd go back, they'd come back, and again he would say, "Oh, it's interesting. Now why do you say that?" And then finally they would either tell him, "Well, man, I don't really know," or they showed conviction, and that's how he would make his decision on what he would do, on what directions to take when he knew nothing about the content. Because if you're questioning somebody and you're comfortable and you've done your homework and you have tried to poke enough holes in what you're teaching that you couldn't find something wrong and now you feel comfortable to present it, man, invite questions. But if you haven't done that and you're relying on outside sources to punch, only then could you be defensive, man. But
Hmm.
I think that's the thing too, man. It's not only question everything, but question what you're doing. That's the first place to start. Man, try to find everything wrong with what you're doing. And if you can't, now you've got something that you can start to move forward with. The same way with, I think, your level of understanding. Like until you can actually take this information and make sense to a 6-year-old, like, dude, it don't really matter. I've always thought this, that NASA could come up with the blueprint and they say, man, here
Yeah.
it is for the 114-mile-per-hour guy that will never get hurt. And he will throw every pitch wherever you call it. It wouldn't matter. Because by the time I take that information, it's based on my interpretation, it's based on my level of understanding, it's based on my level of communication. Now I'm passing it over to his interpretation. So it's like a whiskey distillation process. By the time it reaches the
Mm.
player, man, it's at what, 10, 15%?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, man, if you don't, the player's blueprint or perception of the movement, the picture that you're painting in his head, that's the pattern on the screen. And the blueprint, the builder's tools will never be more important than the blueprint, because that's what's creating the tools or the desire or need for it, right?
Absolutely. Well, and yeah, you say builders tools or even ways on like we'll do another kind of example here is like culinary arts or like eating grandma's cookies over
Right.
Christmas
Exactly
versus
right.
someone else. They could take the exact same recipe, but hey, actually, funny enough, why grandma's cookies would taste so much better is because her oven doesn't work like just like
Yeah,
theirs. So it was a little bit more of a slower cooking process, or maybe it wasn't exactly 400. It was actually 375, but they cook at 400 and they burn it in a factory. You know, it's
exactly right, man. That's a good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, cool. Well, I know there was a tweet too that it might have been yesterday where you were saying like, hey, I haven't read any baseball books or anything like that, and I was like, you know what, I can relate to that because there's
Yeah,
not much in the baseball industry. Like I'll still look at it, I'll be like, all right, like hey, like let's dabble into it, but I'm not going to use that as a resource for learning really because it's all either regurgitated info
yeah,
or watered down and renamed, you know,
mhm, yeah.
unfortunately. But What what other, I guess, resources have you been kind of tapping into? I know you probably kind of jokingly said the dog book.
Oh, I
Um,
read pet training. I got it all. Yeah, body language is another one I like. I like a lot of the evolutionary psychology stuff. My favorite author is Robert Greene, though. You read
oh,
Mastery?
yeah, I actually
My favorite.
listened to him speak earlier last month. Great dude. And he was talking about Napoleon Bonaparte and how he was like the best entrepreneur and like, before it was like really established as like a career choice, I could say, because he was like started out, you know, kind of a no one, and then ends up turning into being like a king, and obviously part of that higher stature kind of like led him down to his downfall, basically. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
yeah, he's a very intriguing read, but also intriguing person too.
and how he tells his stories and just relates it back to something that
That's
you
actually
understand.
happening now. Yeah.
I think that's a. I was going to go in a different direction, but I think that's a really important part to communication, man. Is knowing who you're talking to, right?
Hmm.
But it's being able to take something new and create or form an analogy of a system that they have an understanding or experience with. So let's just say this, like you're trying to teach somebody the legs. I could sit here and talk about 32 degrees and hinge or whatever you want it to say, right? But what if I said, hey man, you're from New Jersey. You ever pushed a car out of the snow? How would you do it? Well, that right there is gonna get them out of hip extension. So now you've taken an experience they have done before. So now they've stripped this baseball association and all this pitch mechanics out, and they've opened up the door for pushing a car. So now I'm going to push a car as I throw. And now you've created a totally different picture, and now you've changed that pattern permanently instantly. But that's another big part of it too. And I think that's what Robert Greene does is he takes, whatever concept or something he's describing, and then he'll show it in another context in history and how it's applied. So I think that's kind of what accelerates the learning curve with him. But that's one reason why I really like him, his ability and how he tells the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's definitely a really really in depth, and obviously if any of the listeners here have read any of his books, like how crazy and in depth he can get.
Right. One of my favorite things in Mastery is Leonardo da Vinci. Like he started off drawing flowers and like birds, and he wanted to learn to draw a better bird. So what he did, he attended a university there and got a degree in engineering simply for the fact of understanding the functioning and why behind flying, so he could draw the better form of the bird. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. No, I love that. There was one thing, and I was actually looking it up here too, in my notes, where he was talking about Miyamoto Musashi, the
Mhm.
samurai,
Yep.
and he was saying like all of his opponents were so focused on the materials, or like how their swords were and how their everything else, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna focus on my mindset, or the psychological component and the spirit, right? I'm not gonna focus too much on the resources, all this stuff. Like he was focusing on being fearless, formless, right? Kind of like
Yeah.
a Bruce Lee type.
Yeah.
But I was like, dude, that is so parallel to what's happening in baseball
So
right
true.
now, because everyone's like, oh, we got to have this new gadget or this new thing, or like, don't get me wrong, like there might be a time and place for some of those, but it's like that's not the answer, man. Like the answer is within the athlete, or within themselves first and
Yeah, man.
foremost. Like if they can get that right, then they can problem solve and figure out anything else.
Right on, but that's not sexy enough for social media. So it's not ever going to be spread the message. It's going to be some bullshit. They ever have a velocity league like they used to have their old roller derbies? Man, we got some superstars.
Yeah,
We made
that's
it to where the game is in the metal shed and development's on the dirt. We've got it backwards, man.
hmm
There's a lot of that's context shapes content, right?
that's it.
That's just kind
No,
of where it's at.
that's definitely true. Well, yeah. Outside of Robert Greene, has there been anything else you've been kind of diving into lately, or anything that's kind of sparked your interest?
Oh man, I'm
Or maybe something that you're just kind of going down rabbit holes with?
oh man, there's a lot of
There's a
lot
lot of
of
rabbit holes. I'll give you that.
lot of rabbit holes, man.
Or
New
following the right
stuff.
white rabbit, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that one too. Um, man, we us man not man. Garrison. I'm in so many rabbit holes that help. Well, Alice ain't got shit, man. Um, yeah, so you don't have anything. The biggest thing to me that always fascinates me is always like the human behavior or the psychology behind it, because I always think that's the lowest hanging fruit. Like,
Mhm.
for an example, before I'll ever look at anybody's video, number one, I don't think you can just look at video from one angle. I think that's impossible. It's got to be four angles.
I
I
agree.
think that it's got to be in real time because it's all, you're looking for the flow, the interruption, right? And so what I like to do is I like to watch a guy throw, and then I like to guess what cues he uses, what drills does he use, because like I said, movement tells a story, and those are like footprints in the sand, because those will always be reflected in that. So it's cool just to kind of, we call it an emotion capture is what we call it. So we're just asking a series of questions and just kind of trying to establish his purpose, his intentions, what advice he feels important, because what advice is always weighted differently. So those are all those, because there's such an emotional component to this too, man. But we're always looking at that physical. We're always looking at that muscular. We're not ever taking into the consideration about the power of the nervous system
Mhm.
and what it does. And that's always the lowest hanging fruit. And a lot of it is just starts with their communication, getting a background, getting some history on these guys,
Yeah,
because
you're just getting more content or
right,
context. It's more
context.
context.
Yeah, you have to have it, man. Because I see it. Here's the thought I've been pondering probably the most. You're gonna ask the rabbit hole. Is movement starts with a P. And the three flaws I always see everything traced back to, in my opinion, are either the lack of proprioception. They just were playing a rotational sport, and if it wasn't for the core velocity belt, there's no way I would have any idea what proprioception meant, or what any of that meant. But once you dig into something, you get a little bit deeper. The questions start to evolve and change. So it was so it's proprioception, because without proprioception, coordination doesn't exist. So if we're playing a rotational sport, and let's give you an example of proprioception. If you ever fell asleep and the nerves got cut off, and all of a sudden your fingers dead, you can't feel your hands, they fell asleep. Imagine a piano playing a song like that. Would a drill help him sync that up? No, oh man, you probably need to wait until your fingers get some circulation back,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
that's kind of what we're doing with so many guys, man. They just don't have, they're not synced up, and they've got these inefficiencies because they just can't control the middle of the body, because they don't have the awareness necessary to be able to do that. So it's not a coordination or a sequencing problem. It's a neural problem, because their wires aren't clearly labeled and connected to where they're going. The other one is purpose. They're just doing it wrong on purpose and didn't know. Maybe they're starting off way too wide, or starting off in a squat, and they think that's because of their legs. So then the third one lends to perception. It's the
Mhm.
perception of the movement. The pictures that's been painted in their head are just off. So if you can trace it, you'll usually trace it back to either their perception of the movement, their purpose behind the movement, or their lack of movement due to a lack of proprioception.
Yeah. I love that. You made it pretty simple and easy to explain and without a Google spreadsheet. It's great.
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, so that's kind of about where I've been, is that everything after I look at the mound now, and I see inputs on the left, outputs on the right. And so I'm not even worried about this side. I'm looking at the introductory side. Unless, of course, I like, one of the most important things I think in video is watching what happens after the throw is a big one for me, because how a ball of yarn unwinds tells you how it was wound up.
Hmm.
But it would also give you insight to his intention or purpose based on instruction or cues or what he perceives, like reach out, get extension, because when you see him disconnected like that, but that's an issue. But then if you trace it back, it was due to his purpose and his perception of what he thought he was supposed to do. So it would never be a problem on this side of the mountain as they're going down.
Oh, sure. Well, even with that setup too, sometimes there's just the context is so diluted that once they get into a game, they miss a lot of what they could actually be improving on. It's like, oh hey, yeah, on the last bullpen you did really great at this, but when you got in the game you sucked. All right, cool. Well, whenever I was doing my bullpen on the side, I was just throwing to a catcher. I didn't have a hitter in the box. I didn't have to worry about balls and strikes being called. I didn't have to worry about looking at my armband, which is a whole other thing, but like, making sure that I'm throwing the right pitch. There's a lot of other variables being added in there that can change that perception, or the neurological wiring, where they probably get anxiety, or they're like, oh wow, okay, like there's a bunch of these other variables coming at them, and if they're not being
Yeah.
challenged in that, it's hard to succeed.
Uh, that's freaking awesome. First thing it reminds me of and I think that's a huge problem, especially when we're talking about transfer, right? Because
Yeah.
really, ultimately, go, why are we doing all this shit? It's to transfer. Without transfer, it doesn't matter. It's eyewash. So the thing about that, I look at that as an optimization process, because we break like the development phase through 4. We call it just connection, then there's coordination, then there's synchronization, then it's optimization, right?
Mm.
So it reminds me of the Venus and Serena Williams. Their dad taught them how to play tennis. So you think about those two girls, the championships that they've won at Wimbledon, and you think about the environment of Wimbledon. It's very uppity. I'll give you the golf clap,
Yeah.
very polite. Here's these two girls from South Central LA, man. The first thing in the very first lesson, their dad taught them how to play tennis was how to hit the ground during a drive-by shooting. So you look at the element, their environment that they're practicing, and the constraints and the pressure, and versus, so for there to Wimbledon. So if only more pitchers would train in Compton and pitch in Wimbledon versus train in Wimbledon and pitch in Compton, we'd be a lot better off, because it's exactly what you're saying, man.
Yeah.
We're introducing multiple constraints during a competitive situation, and more than likely it's on a totally different continent because we've spent so much damn time on flat ground that the movement constraints and requirements of a mound are totally different. So you've got the atmosphere, you've got the environment, you've got everything going against you, and we go back to pitching lessons just so we can repeat the same process again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's bad. It's
Most of it just doesn't even make sense because nobody's questioned it. And you know why they don't question it? Because shit, used to con men would have to move from town to town, but now they can just stay behind a computer, and we're always one click away from the next expert. So nobody ever trusts their instincts, man.
Yeah. It's sad. Well, now they have apps coming out now where they can type out our content and stuff for us, which is kind of scary too. The whole AI thing. I'm like, oh, you want to put out a tweet about, never giving up, and you just write that topic, and then just
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
yeah, no, it's nuts. I'm like, all right,
Crazy.
well, that's terrible. And then I have another one where it's like, oh,
That's wild.
you put a picture of yourself, and then like AI basically creates another image of you, but you have to go and accept all the terms and conditions saying that they can use your likeness and image. And I don't think people understand what they're actually accepting, man.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Nuts. It's
That's wild.
but it's taking away the art of it, I guess, is my point here. It's like, you can have as much science or anything, but like, yeah, there's the art and a science, but you're drowning out a lot of the art, I think.
Yeah, is it really science?
That's true too.
I mean, really, like, you think about this.
Boil it down to like the scientific method, a lot of it.
Yes. But the science today is a method to sell, not to discover. That's what it's used as.
Yeah.
Right. That's really what it is. And shit, where was I going? Oh, you've had some good points, man. Goodness gracious, where was I going? If I comes
Just taking out the art of everything, or
yeah, the art is in communication, and that's where so many lack, because they don't think it's important. They think, hey, if I know this content, if I can regurgitate and recite that anatomical textbook, I know enough. And if you're not getting it, that's your fault, right? Because they don't understand the power of communication. That's a really big part, and that's what I see with the best coaches, the best communicators. But that's another issue is that side of things, in the art, in the science. But here was the question I had: is we talk about how technology has advanced the game of baseball.
Oh yeah, that was another Twitter.
How has it advanced? And here's why I say that. So I say that because, well, it's increased velocity. How do we know it's increased velocity? Well, look how hard they're throwing now versus then. Well, are we going to say that tech is 1-to-1? So then the tech really hasn't advanced us if it's 1-to-1.
Direct correlate, yeah.
So all right, so let's not say that. Well, it's because they throw harder. Well, here's the thing, man. Before we had radar guns and it was important, our attention wasn't focused on the gun. Suddenly our attention is focused on the gun. It becomes important. Now in an alpha male clubhouse, we see that one guy did that. So suddenly we know it's possible. It's like the Bruce Bannister mile, right? Then all of a sudden everybody could do it. So here's my livelihood on the line. Here is my reputation. It's on the line. Nobody wants to be the beta male. And so what's happened is they broke through barriers of disbelief. Suddenly they knew it was possible. It became the attention of focus. So that, in my opinion, is why it throws harder. But my question if it's advanced so much, how in the hell can we spend millions of dollars on tech and all this research to find or pinpoint the problem? and then use the scientific advancements to hand out 5 drills that's been around 20 years to solve them. Like in science about solving problems, all science is doing is creating more problems that we can't solve.
Yeah. More problems.
Pivot picks ain't the answer. Roll-ins, like all that, like you can give me all the motion capture and shit you need, and then you're gonna hand me a damn pivot pick and this. Like that's what I'm getting at. Is like, come on, just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. But like I said before, is like they feel almost inferior because they're like, wow, actually, because they feel a part of them deep down is like, yeah, shit, he's right. But I can't completely change everything that I'm doing right now.
Yeah, right.
Into it.
No doubt. There's no doubt. There's absolutely right. Absolutely right. I've always said this too about the data and how it's captured. Like, Garrison, how good would it? Like, I'm teaching you how to drive. All right. So obviously, when you're driving, you're paying attention to the speedometer. You look out in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon, you create an association based on all the data you're getting from the spatial requirements from car to car, and the noise and the sound, and
how fast how much I'm putting pressure on the pedal, and
right, heart rate, breath. I mean, everything's being monitored and evaluated. So what if I just put you on the road, but I didn't let you see your speedometer, and then I put whoever next to you and said, all right, we're gonna test you two guys. So one guy is going to go, you go one route, another guy goes another route, but I didn't let you see your speedometer. And then you came back. I said, man, you only averaged 13.4 miles per hour. Would that do you any good? What about the 35 or 35 in the school zone versus the 65 on the road? Or one guy went up the mountain, one guy went on the freeway, right? But handing somebody data after the fact just to look up validations is not ever going to create a connection with the brain and body, mind, muscle, because you're not getting that immediate, that real-time data that creates that learned association for actually experiencing it, actually taking that real-time data and applying it with what you're starting to feel or what you perceive, because that's really what sticks. Like, you think about how many kids can actually type or text without looking. And you're talking about spaces that are millimeters apart, but they can't define the difference between a strike zone that's 2 feet apart. It's because they're not being taught to gather this feedback to create that, one goal, one focus only. Now I'm just trying to create an environment that's rich in sensory feedback. So it starts to create or connect the links to create that sixth sense really with proprioception. But that's just not ever done, man. We don't use data like that. We don't use it real time. We're trying to get all this mass data after the guy, the bullpen's done, and then we're getting his average of spin rate. We're getting his, we're not ever giving it to him in real time like it's that speedometer, so you can create that learned association for whatever you're trying to do. Or it would be
you need the learned association. And I think that's a great point, because there's a lot of that happening in pro ball. I think some organizations are getting better at it, but like they would collect all this stuff and they wouldn't even tell them like what it means. And I would literally be in some of these facilities like teaching them like, hey, like, this is the stuff of the data that like they're handing you and what this actually means. How do you not know this? Like, shouldn't they be teaching you these? Maybe not go super into the rabbit holes necessarily. Like, I agree with them. Like, don't tell them every single thing, but it's like, hey, what's the difference between, this amount of vert or this amount of horizontal run, or like, hey, what's the goal? What am I trying to do?
Right. Yeah.
So
it's hard to know if you made the shot if you never had a goal you were shooting at. And most of them are giving it, right? They're just relying on that guy. They're shooting it from half court with no backboard, no rim, and there's an instructor down there. I think it went in. Kind of how it is, man. Because a lot of stuff I always go back to is just kind of like the basketball. Growing up in Kentucky like that, because you think about with basketball, man, like guys that can shoot it, right away whether it's good or bad, right? Like can you shoot ball?
Yeah, but not nearly as good as others.
Do you know when it's good or bad right out of the hand?
Oh yeah, you definitely.
How do you know?
Feel to it.
So how would you say you know?
You're picking up all the information from it, like how it feels out of the hand, how the arc is, how it's lined up as it's traveling to the net, which is after the fact. I think it would all be going off of proprioception, I guess, right?
Right. So the key is, how do you create that? That's the end result, right? Mm-hmm. Because at first you don't know that. So it starts with a very clear goal. There's only one goal. How many guys, when they pick up a baseball, there's one goal and it's very clear. Everybody in the room knows what you're shooting at, so we're all on the same page. Mm-hmm. Number two, it either goes in or it don't. You either won or you lost on that throw. There is no gray area. Like, did you
Yeah.
win or did you lose? Right. So you get that immediate feedback. Then you start to see it. And so you're talking about the line. If it goes here, if it goes there, then there's a a sound, nothing but net. Cover your head brick, hearing your opponent or whatever, you just know. So as the brain takes in all that information, then it just starts to connect it to a feel through that. It's not the quantity of reps, but it's the quality of quantity, quantity of quality reps, right? So you're just spoon feeding that nervous system with the type of information so it can start to determine all the coordinates that it needs just to be able to repeat this stuff. But most don't look at throwing a baseball like that, right? So they're not gathering that real-time data that's always available because they're not ever looking for it. Like you said, it's not made important to them. It's just like,
Sure.
hey, we got it, we'll show it to you.
Well, it's almost like, I guess if you want to relate it in terms of basketball, it's like, okay, hey, like all these bullpens, they're looking at like horizontal and vertical movement, but at the same time, like you throw in a batter, you might have a really poor movement one, but it still gets the hitter out.
Yes, yes. You're like those cement mixers up in the zone. Or
Yeah.
those changeups that just miss it. They pop up to the infield every time. Because something they can't take into effect, man. You start to think about changing this right here, and you get a guy that throws from this angle, and all of a sudden it rides up and in. That's going to fool a guy every time because his history bank of experiences tells him that ball is going to do this. And when it does something it's not supposed to do, just like the curveball, the 12-6, it just stays up in the zone. My history, that perception gap tells me I'm going to have to get my barrel down, but then it's up, and so it's that delayed feedback loop is really critical in that situation.
Well, that's how you are deceptive.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so a lot of times, and Eugene said this at Palooza, and I love this. He goes, those aren't limitations, those are adaptations.
Yeah.
And he's right on.
Definitely agree with that.
Because there's again, going back to the context and just the cause and effect, like with pitch development, a big one is just a purpose, right? And it's their perception of what they think it's supposed to look like. So you can talk about all this other stuff, but man, the fastest way I've seen to change any spin is change the angle of the shin. Like you change the shin, you change the spin instantly. There's a lot of stuff that goes with that.
Yeah, go into depth about that a little bit more. I'm curious. Are you talking about like vertical shin angle versus?
Yeah, you just picture a PVC pole.
Okay.
Right. So posture will always determine positions because the body's number one goal is to keep it upright. So the goal is to keep the middle in the middle. Right. So for every movement, there's an equal but opposite movement just to keep the middle in the middle. If not, we're Humpty Dumpty and we just splash. So that's the nervous system just governing every single movement. It's the nervous system just saying, hey, safety first, performance second.
Sure.
So as that PVC pole starts to go, you think about what that's doing here. So if that shin angle starts to go, it's going to take the spine with it as it starts to go. Now I'm starting just to tilt just the slightest bit. And you think an eighth of an inch over 60 feet is 8 inches, a quarter of an inch is 16. The width of the plate is 17. So the variations and the subtle variations are huge. So a lot of times you can just start to alter shins or constrain space with the shin, man, the spin's going to change instantly. That's what drives me crazy when I see all these videos on social media and they'll show these before and after, and both times their feet are just spinning everywhere. And I'm just thinking, like, what principles do you have in place that allows that to happen?
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem with pitching. And Hunter Bledsoe is so huge on this. He's been talking about this since 2012. Is before you talk about any methods, man, methods are many, principles are few. What principles do you have in place that you set forth and your players can all know and recite? But I think a lot of people will say this and that, but it really comes down to positions is where their lens is versus the principles and the reasonings why they're able to achieve that and do it consistently.
Yeah. No, definitely agree. Definitely agree. Cool. Awesome. Well, that's all I got for you, Lance. So you got any other closing remarks?
Dude, this is awesome, man. Just like getting to sit down here with you and chop it up like this. I love stuff like this, man. But I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, yeah, go ahead and plug your social handles and where people can get in touch with you and we can go from there.
Yeah, you can find me at Lantz Wheeler, LANTZ Wheeler on Twitter. And then Core Velocity Belt and BaseballThinkTank.com are the two sites. So, but man, I appreciate you do a good job with this, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. I like your flow to it. It's just whatever goes. Like that's a veteran move, man. It's really good.
How it should be.
I like the Joe Rogan of baseball, man.
Yeah, that's it.
So, well,
That's
good
how
job, man.
you
I appreciate you having me, Garrison. But thank you, man.
absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, stay in the zone.